Good morning, East Bay. What is happening in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties? Learn about what's happening in our communities, an in-depth conversation so you know what's going on. We're talking to government, economic, political, nonprofit, and business leaders here in the greater East Bay. I'm Jared Asch, the host of the Capstone Conversation. Welcome to today's episode of the Capstone Conversation. I am your host, Jared Asch, and today we are joined by the great mayor of Antioch in Contra Costa County, Mayor Thorpe. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me and delighted to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about your background. What did you do before you were mayor? Where do you come from? What's your history? Share your story with us.
Well, before I was the mayor, I was the council member. And so I was an at-large city council member before we went into districts. And, my professional career is in higher education administration. That's where I spent most of my time. Prior to that, I was a third grade teacher and an eighth grade teacher in Washington, D.C. And of course, I served in the United States Navy for 8 years, 5 active and three in the reserves. And so that's kind of who I am. And then I one day ran for mayor, and here I am as the mayor of the greatest city God ever created, and that's the city of Antioch. And if you don't believe me, it's in the Bible.
Let me just flip to that page and send you there. S- So tell us more about the city of Antioch, its history, its background, its geography, what makes it unique, what makes it the greatest city.
Well, Antioch is actually one of California's oldest cities. And it's Contra Costa's very first city. And so we're special in that regard. Obviously, given the history, just like California's history, Antioch's early history is it's ugly, particularly as it relates to, Asian Americans. We were one of the first cities who had sundown town laws where we made it impossible for Chinese people, Chinese immigrants to live here. And later on in our history, we literally ran the Chinese out by burning their communities to the ground. And it wasn't a secret. It was, headline news in the Sacramento Bee, the San Francisco Chronicle, all these different newspapers reported on it, not in a way that, well, look, this horrible thing happened. It was like the Caucasian torch came and expelled the Chinese who were bringing all these problems. So it was a pretty ugly time for certain people, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't, it was good times for some people. And so we have a 150-year plus history in our city, and so a lot of culture, a lot of European diversity, and so up until the 1990s, Antioch was exclusively white. Today, we are the second most racially diverse city in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the fastest growing in Northern California. And of course, now the second largest city in Contra Costa County. So we've come a long way in terms of building a city that's inclusive and welcoming of all people. Has not been easy by any stretch of the imagination. And while there's always been tensions in terms of particularly racial tensions, it feels like it's all come ahead in my last 3 years as mayor. So it's been fascinating to watch all this and have a front row seat, but not just have a front row seat. In many ways, I'm also kind of the bus driver of all this, and trying to get people to a location that makes them feel safe in their community, makes them feel welcome in their community. And it's not easy. It's a rambunctious bunch of people. And I say that in a good way because it speaks to our maturation process. There's just different ideas now, and the way business was done in the past isn't the way forward. It's got to be in a way that includes everybody.
So let's hit on some of the development in Antioch. You guys have a ton of new housing coming up. If you drive, I live in Walnut Creek, and I've come to Antioch one of the most beautiful ways you can, around through Clayton, around Mount Diablo, and through the middle of nowhere and farm country. And you come up Deer Hill Road to the backside where the first thing you hit is a Kaiser, beautiful new Kaiser facility in Antioch. And then you see From farms and open space, you see housing development after housing development, new housing. If you go to and then you have nice single family homes in that area, and you go to another part of Antioch, and it looks like there's two very diverse Antiochs. Talk about the growth the city is experiencing and how you're taking that in.
Well, I always tell people being mayor of Antioch is like being mayor of two cities. As you know, we have two zip codes. One is one of the wealthiest zip codes in eastern Contra Costa County, second to Discovery Bay. Many people think it's Brentwood, but it's not. It's actually in Antioch, and that's the 94531 zip code. And then we have another zip code that is in Antioch's more historical and older parts. And while at one point it was one of the poorest zip codes in the county. It has, interestingly enough, the median household income has gone up. To my surprise, it was like in the 50s, or it's now up to like close to $80,000 in terms of median household income, which for the Bay Area is is relative to everything is still moderate to low. But so it's like being mayor of two cities. The zip code that I talked about earlier, the 94531, is where you have a lot of diversity. You have a lot of new folks who have come into the city. You have it's this side of town that now decides the elections in Antioch. It's where the majority of African Americans live in that part of Antioch. And interesting enough, that zip code is also home to the largest concentration of Black people in the Bay Area with advanced degrees. And so I always tell people, when you look at my resume and you look at who I am, please don't take that to be an exception of anything, because that is the norm for Antioch. And so it's a privilege to live in a community like that. But at the same time, there's an imbalance, obviously, when it comes to, like, income and wealth inequality. It's here. There are people who have lived here for generations, who for generations grew up in a working class community where you can go work at a factory, you could go work at the steel mill. And today, those jobs are relatively gone, particularly after the 1980s. And so there are a lot of folks here who have been waiting for change for a long, long time. And so it's just interesting. It's interesting to see all that. Yeah, obviously, infrastructure issues are going to be different in each side of town. We probably invest more in the northern part of town than we do in the southern part of town, because the infrastructure is much older. So we do our best to ensure that we're being equitable. There's a lot of work to do to kind of bring some level of continuity within Antioch. As an example, there's a street, which is the one street that traverses throughout Antioch. It's in southeast Antioch, it's called Lone Tree. You get to the northern part of Antioch, it's called A Street. And then you get to the downtown historic district, and it's called Second Street. And at some point, I think we're going to, in order to bring people together in this idea that we're just one Antioch, we're going to have to rename that street. And whether it's Lone Tree, A Street, Second Street, it's got to be one name that traverses throughout our entire city. That street connects our police department, city hall. It connects our parks and recreation department. It connects our community center up in the southern part. And so it can't be a street that's divided, because I think it's symbolic of kind of the different generations that existed here.
That's fascinating. I mean, you see that in other areas where a road will cut through multiple cities. I think Ignacio Valley becomes Kirker Pass, become railroad, or intersects with railroad down in Pittsburgh. But within one city, it's interesting how you describe just the history of the town, and you can see the evolution on that one road.
You absolutely can. People who live around Second Street in downtown, which we call the historic Rivertown district, have a completely different existence and life experience than someone who lives off of A Street. And then obviously, once you get up to Lone Tree, the experiences of people are much, much drastically different than someone who would live off of A Street. And so it's important to note those things, but it's important to also have an understand. It's important to contextualize those experiences, particularly as policymakers, so that you know how to deal with these issues. But it's also important to create unity among the different socioeconomic backgrounds that we have here in the community.
So easier said than done. What are some policies, social events, things that you're doing to create that atmosphere you're sort of talking about?
Well, I would like to say that I wish, we could just do everything under the sun. But as you know, government, we have a certain set of parameters, and it's largely built around the budget and what you have the money to do. And so, in terms of the question that you just asked, I think we have been laser focused on the idea of equity, particularly in our older parts of the community. We recognize, as an example, that, while we would love the county to fix all of our problems, for whatever reason, we still don't have a homeless shelter in Eastern Contra Costa County. There is no care center in Eastern Contra Costa County. So we decided, you know what? We can't just let people languish on our streets. So we decided to master lease a hotel, use our own money, and start housing people. In addition to that, we recognize that it's one thing to put people in homes, but as we're putting people in housing and trying to transition them into permanent housing, we also recognize that there's another leak on the other side, which is people are losing housing. And so we decided to do something pretty historic, particularly for Eastern Contra Costa County, and that was to do rent stabilization and then anti-tenant harassment policy, and we're working on just cause eviction. And so I think we try to look at things from an equitable lens to ensure that people are able to maintain housing, because it's different depending on what part of town you're in. So your question is brilliant in terms of contextualizing and understanding these challenges.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing. I want to dive into two things you just said: rent stabilization and just cause eviction. Other cities are looking at it throughout the Bay Area and throughout California. What did you ultimately adopt in Antioch?
Well, some people might argue, depending on what side of the issue you're on, that we adopted one of the most progressive policies in California, and then some other people would probably say we adopted a radical uh, anti-landlord policy. Yes, depending on who you ask, you can get a different answer. I think we passed a policy that was just for people. Listen, you and I both know that the Bay Area cost of living continues to go up, and the largest chunk that people pay in cost after they've worked a hard week to put food on the table is housing. There's just no bones about it. Whether you own a home or whether you're renting a home or whether you're renting a studio or whatever, maybe you're renting a room. Relative to your overall income, housing is taking a large chunk, and it continues to go up. It is absolutely ridiculous. I bought my home for $359,000, 3,000 square foot plus home, which I love and proud of. But it went from 359 to, when I put it on the market, it was going for like a million plus. I've only lived in Antioch 11 years. And in those 11 years, the house has astronomically skyrocketed to my advantage, right? I'm not complaining by any stretch of the imagination. But I, where would I be today if I didn't have a house, or if I was renting, or I would be able to afford? That's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And so, the economic downturn for some folks was bad. For other people like myself, we were able to take advantage of the opportunity that existed, which is housing prices had hit rock bottom. And so I was able to afford a home. But outside of that, how would I ever be able to afford a home in the Bay Area? And by the way, I live, you know, in Bay Area suburbs. I don't live in the inner core of the Bay Area. So can you imagine what the costs are in communities that are closer to the job centers?
Yeah, I just recorded an episode with the Realtors Association of Contra Costa and Solano counties, and they said an interesting stat that throughout the Bay Area, only 1 in 4 people, 25%, can afford a home.
Mhm.
And they defined it as not just a single family resident, but any resident. And they said that's a staggeringly low number. But we said that you're still getting multiple offers on most places, especially when interest rates come back down, you'll get even more, which will actually drive prices up further. And they just said it's a housing supply issue. There's just not enough here, but it's not good for the overall economy if 1 out of 4 people could afford a home.
Yeah. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, it's just a bad situation. And for renters, they're always stuck between a rock and a hard place because they have to provide housing for their families. And then we have examples of landlords not being too kind. And so our role was to get all landlords to a level where respectable landlords are, and that is to treat their tenants with some level of fairness as it relates to rent hikes, and some level of dignity when it comes to settling or figuring out disputes. And so most landlords we're already abiding by that standard. We just elevated those who weren't. And for decades here in the city of Antioch, and I've gone to these apartment complexes, I visited them, and I was just blown away at the absolute neglect by some of these landlords as it relates to these huge corporate apartment complexes. It was disgusting, from mold to just dilapidated parking structures to a host of other things. So I saw an unfair situation that a lot of people were fine with, and I just personally, myself and other council members were not. And so that's how it goes.
And can you recall any of the specifics that were in there? What did it touch on? Like, did it cap rent growth at X
We
percent?
capped we capped rent increases at 3% or 60% of CPI, whichever is lower. And so that was basically, I mean, at the heart of the matter, that was it.
Sure. Okay, that's helpful to understand. Want to pivot and talk about desalinization. You guys have a new plant going in there in Antioch. Is it now operational?
It will be later this year.
Okay. Talk to us about what are you trying to achieve? What's your goal? Educate people about the plant.
Global warming is real. Climate change is real. The ice caps are melting. As the ice caps melt, it sends more water down and it creates more ocean water coming up the Bay Area, coming into the Delta. And so that makes it difficult for us as a city to pump water. As you know, Antioch is because we are one of the oldest cities in California. We have what we call pre 1419 water rights. That means we have superior water rights to most cities in California. And that means we are really the only city who gets to pump directly from the Delta. No other city gets to pump from the Delta. We have our own water distribution, collection and distribution plant. Most cities buy, especially in our area, buy their water from the Contra Costa Water District. And so they have their own process in terms of how they get the water. But there's more salt in the water, and we need to pump water. And so the water desalination plant, or the brackish water desalination plant, is a solution to the real challenge of climate change that's taking place right before our eyes. But the desalination plant also allows us to keep water rates lower than Contra Costa Water District. And so we're one of the few cities that if you compare our water rates, are much lower than most folks in the Bay Area. So that's a plus. And so the desalination plant will allow us to keep doing that, because if we ever had to switch over to Contra Costa Water District, our rates are going to go immediately up.
That's great. So you guys were able to make a significant financial investment in new infrastructure and yet keep your rates lower than some of the bigger entities. So congratulations on that. Good plus. So let's talk about Antioch on the water. You have access to a deep water port. How does that help and hurt the economy of Antioch? And what's the potential future that can be taken advantage of there?
Well, the potential is already happening right before your eyes. We have amports here now. They're going to be shipping in cars, and so they're going to be building a huge facility for the offloading of all these vehicles that are going to be coming from foreign countries. And so the port is currently working, and it should be later this year or next year where they'll begin construction on the facility. But they already have ships coming in, so anybody is welcome to take advantage of that. Does it hurt the economy? It does certainly doesn't hurt the economy. Does it bring jobs? Absolutely. We're talking about longshoreman jobs. Those are high paying jobs. And so anything we can do to spur economic growth in that realm, I'm excited about. So I was excited to vote for that project. Does it come with environmental challenges? Absolutely. And I don't want to sit here and pretend that, ships don't pollute. They do. And so, but we're all marching towards a new reality of how we reduce these emissions in our air. We're regulated in terms of how many ships can come in to ensure that the air quality is good. So the Air Quality Board has regulated that, and so it's not like it's going to be an endless amount of ships coming into our port. I think we're limited to about 6 a year. So we're doing our best to ensure that we take residents, or the environment into perspective as we're making these decisions.
That's great. I didn't realize it was limited to only 6 ships a year. That's 1 every other month. That's not a significant amount that can come.
Well, it's a significant amount when the port hasn't been working or hasn't been utilized the way it should be. So whether it's 1 or 6, it's significant to us. And let's not forget that the economic impact starts when those cars are off the ship and into this facility and then being moved off to different locations. So that means they're using our roads and whatnot. So the economic impact is significant for a port that has been idle for decades.
I have been doing a little bit of research, and something to keep in mind is apparently there's a lot of food, raw food materials that goes past Antioch and Pittsburgh and on out. And like you can have grain and product for granola, but it goes out elsewhere to be processed. And so might be opportunity. I don't know what the economics are in processing it in this country, but if you could look at food processing and capturing ships leaving that are passing by, it might be something to look at. And I could put you in touch with a couple people that know more than I do if you ever want to talk further about it.
Sure. Yeah. Antioch is not immune to food manufacturing. We used to have lots of uh, canneries here in Antioch, which is where a lot of our contamination comes from. But who would have thought, tomato peels would have contaminated the environment, but they do. So there's, Antioch had a history of manufacturing and particularly in the food products. So that wouldn't be unusual for our area and certainly something worth exploring.
I want to pivot to transportation. You sit on the CCTA, Contra Costa Transit Authority Board, and the that authority, along with the city of Antioch and I think Oakley and maybe Pittsburgh, have created a contract for a rail line using smart technology and glideways is where I'm talking about. Can you talk a little bit about the glideways program, what it will be offering, and what should people know?
So yes, so it's in partnership with not the cities, but in part, well, kind of with the cities, yes, because it's our right of way, but really it's being led through Tri Delta Transit, our regional transportation authority here, which I happen to be the chair of. And so that's something we're currently exploring. It should be interesting. It would be a line dedicated, not line like a railroad, but a glide way where small vehicles traverse, where you would have up to like 4 occupants that will literally take you to certain locations throughout the region to get you to bark faster and much more efficiently than the current process, which is either drive or take Uber or Lyft to try my ride. So we're always exploring new ways to make accessibility to transit much more efficient. And so this is one of those ideas.
Great. I appreciate it. I want to talk next about city government and some of the changes that are going on there. You have an interim city manager at the time we're recording this, at least an interim deputy city manager. What is the process to find the right fit for the city and move into full positions?
Well, we have acting city manager and an
Sorry,
acting
acting.
city manager. So, this speaks to what I was talking about earlier, and that's the maturation process in the city. Antioch was once a quiet city off the Delta, and no one really talked about it. Again, it's one of the fastest growing cities in the Bay Area and in Northern California. Who is coming here, is going to shape the politics of what's happening. And, we have a lot of folks who now come from cities like San Francisco, Oakland, where the role of the mayor is much different than what it is here. And so the expectations of what people think I can and can't do, can be somewhat unreasonable. And even in cities where like San Francisco or Oakland, where you have like strong mayor positions, there's still a professional at the helm in the form of a city manager, a city administrator who are taking care of some of these issues. So now we're in the process of trying to find the right city manager who makes good sense for our city, who kind of recognizes the changes that are taking place, not resisting the changes, who has kind of a better feel for the different demographics of our city, and has a better understanding, particularly around what public safety means. And that public safety doesn't just mean, you know, a police on every corner. It means investing in sheltering people. It means investing in youth programmings. It means investing in gun violence intervention programs that work in the community. And so that's something that we're looking for. And have we been able to find that in recent years? It's been challenging because uh, again, Antioch's going through a maturation process. It's like watching a teenage kid in middle school look at themselves in the mirror with a bunch of pimples, and they're now smelling like BO, and they're coming to grips with some new emotions and whatnot. And that's Antioch at the end of the day. We're a growing city. We're maturing into something. Do we know what that is yet? I'm not precisely sure, but we are in the maturation process, and that's going to come with some heartache and some turnover in terms of getting folks to understand what's happening.
That was a very descriptive analogy, probably of your own high school image in the mirror there, right?
When I looked in the mirror, I looked just fine.
There you go. He just came from a roast the other day, so we were just continuing to give him a hard time here. So we can't talk about Antioch and not talk about the police issues there. I just what I want to talk about today is frame the issue, but let's talk about how you're moving forward in the city versus talking about the past. But if you could frame the issue and then let's talk about what are some of the ways to solve that, that would be great.
Frame the issue. Well, I mean, I'm not going to frame anything. I'm just going to give you the facts. The facts are we
Yeah.
have like 11 officers that were indicted by federal government. Several others by were charged with state crimes by the DA's office, and then over 40 were implicated in a racist text messaging scandal. So as a result of that, we now have two state investigations of the Antioch Police Department. We have an unbelievable amount of lawsuits that we're in the middle of trying to sort through. So as a result of that, we're authorized 115 police officers. Currently, we have about 40 something working on our streets right now for a city of 120 plus thousand people. So those are the facts.
Yep.
Those are the facts. The indictments, a lot of them have to do with civil rights violations and then other types of crimes. And then the Attorney General Bonta's investigation has to do with patterns and practices, obviously around racial bias. And so there's a lot that we're looking at. And then the city council approved my 3 audits related to hiring practices, internal affairs, and also patterns and practices of like a racial equity audit within the police department. So there's a lot going on. So as a result of that, we have started rebuilding. Let me tell you that before all this happened, we had already proposed for police reform. We had done some critical work around police reform, particularly given the backdrop of George Floyd in 2020. So one of my first initiatives was to stop the hiring practice of individuals who are under investigation and coming to the Antioch Police Department. So that no longer happens. That's done and over with. We stopped the use of certain techniques that can cause positional asphyxiation. We instituted a police oversight accountability board, which I'll be inaugurating this month in February. So soon we'll have a celebration for that. I can go on and rattle off all the reforms that we did early on that I think helped us in navigating the challenges that we're navigating today. So how are we rebuilding? we're in the process of doing that. Some people will yell and scream at the top of their lungs, "We need to rebuild. We need to." We're in the process of it. Relax. The since since the announcement of the FBI investigation, I early on said we need to do a hiring incentives. I had asked for 40,000 bonus for new officers. The council approved $30,000 bonuses. Since those bonuses were approved, we've hired 14 new officers straight out of the academy. And by the way, we're hiring straight out of the academy because of our policy that we passed before all of this happened. So, some laterals can come, but you can't be under investigation, period. And so as a result, all of our new candidates have been from the academy. That is great news because it's been no secret what's been happening. So that means the people that we're getting, I don't think they're coming here because of the incentive. I think the incentive created a pool. I think the people who chose to come here have been folks who have seen what's happened and said, you know what, I'm willing to take a chance with Antioch because there's good changes taking place there. And I want to be part of that policing. So I'm excited about that. We also got to hire a new chief of police. So we're in the process of doing that. I had called for the direct appointment being from the city council because my frustration over city managers over the years and their inability to oversee the police department and have and hold the chief accountable was very frustrating. But so that didn't happen. So now when we hire a new city manager, they will be able to appoint a new chief of police. So there's a host of things. We also have the public safety partnership with the federal government that we're in the process of continuing to navigate. So that brings us additional resources. One of the good things that we had done, and I mean good things that we had done, is and we didn't know this was going to happen, but it all happened at the right time. So the Office of Neighborhood Safety in Richmond is something we tried to model here in Antioch. Ours is a little more, it goes beyond just the gun violence interruption stuff, but it gets into, homelessness and it gets into youth programming. So we had just developed the Department of Public Safety and Community Resources. And under that department, we have the new community response team, which no one in Contra Costa County has. And it's 24/7. It's a team of 11 or 12, excuse me. And then we had also just cut the ribbon for our transitional housing hotel where we're housing individuals who are experiencing homelessness. All those things combined, had those things not happened, we would be in a much different situation public safety wise than we are today. The fact of the matter is that the work of the community crisis response team has been invaluable, particularly as we've had this shortage of police officers, because now they take on calls that the police department no longer responds to. So I'll give you an example. A domestic dispute is now something the community crisis response team responds to. Someone talking to themselves on the street is something the community response team responds to versus the police. And so it has offloaded some work on them so that they can focus on the other more dangerous calls. And so it's been extremely helpful. The hotel, before we started doing vouchers and master leasing it, had close to 300 calls per service a year. That one hotel, which was a safe haven for prostitution, drugs, and a host of other things, weapons, shootings, everything else, everything you can think of. Today, that hotel averages about 50 calls a year to the police department. And so, and some of those calls, again, are being now directed to the community crisis response team. So I'm sometimes blown away that all these things fell into place at the right time, even though it wasn't a good situation, but all these things fell at the right time in order to keep supporting the police department and doing their work. And that we weren't at a place where, oh my God, we couldn't. I still believe we need support from CHP, particularly around traffic and controlling these sideshows. And we still need support in relation to investigations because those two departments or those two divisions within the police department were decimated as a result of the racist text messaging scandal. And that's how we're rebuilding. So we're rebuilding public safety, not from the perspective of just police, but from the perspective of the Department of Public Safety and Community Resources.
I like the community resource. Is that a volunteer group or are they paid?
No, these are no, these are all employees.
Okay, they're employees.
Yeah, it's it's modeled after we modeled it after Cahoots over in Oregon.
Okay.
And they call theirs they call it the Cahoots, which is a mental health crisis response team. But we decided that what we didn't want to do is just focus on the mental health. We wanted to focus on a larger scale on some other quality of life issues. And so that really frees up our officers from doing things that, that just shouldn't be. They are not nurses and doctors. They're not mental health specialists. They're not teachers. They're law enforcement. Key word, enforcement. And so enforcement can mean I'm going to yell to get compliance, or I'm going to use my baton, or I can use my weapon. That's enforcement. And so these other areas are key in that we don't get to a point where we need to use enforcement.
Yeah, no, that's a great program, and I'll link to that in the show notes. So we'll make sure we can provide more information to people about that. Sounds like you guys are going to lead in police reform, and I'm sure as you have a new chief, you'll invest in new technology as well, and hopefully new officers will come in.
Right. Yeah.
Follow that lead. What else should people know about Antioch? I think we've covered a lot of topics here, but what haven't I asked you yet before we head out?
You ask, and I just answer. I think Antioch, I think there are some misconceptions about Antioch, which are fascinating to me. I think there's a misconception about Section 8. I've lived in many places in our country. I don't even think I'd ever heard of Section 8 until I moved to Antioch, and there was such vitriol towards this idea of Section 8. Now I'm like, well, what is Section 8? And it's a voucher that you get to use to subsidize your rent. And so, but it's fascinating to me how a lot of folks, and not just in Antioch, but throughout the Bay Area, have blamed challenges with Antioch on Section 8, and particularly those residents who come here.
Mm.
Uh, I, it's fascinating to me because it's a county-run program, and I don't know I wouldn't know who is on a Section 8 voucher. Yet people find it so easy to blame Section 8 on all these problems. So I find that fascinating. I think the economic downturn and the devastation it had on cities like Stockton, Antioch, and Vallejo brought a lot of this misunderstanding, because when things like this happen and then your neighborhood starts to deteriorate because of the economic collapse, you want to blame somebody. And so it's easy to blame certain people. And part of it, and then at the same time, you had this large wave of people of color coming to Antioch. And so then Section 8, the face of Section 8 became really Black people. And so it's been fascinating to me. And so that when I throw those statistics up, like the majority of Black people live in Southeast Antioch. Oh, and by the way, we're the largest concentration of folks with advanced degrees in the Bay Area, and most of us are homeowners. I It's been fact because you hear people say these things. Well, when the Black people started moving to Antioch, or when when Antioch started to allow Section 8, Antioch doesn't control anything related to housing in Section 8. So I share that because I just think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about Antioch. The crime in Antioch is concentrated in certain pockets, and I can take you exactly to where those pockets are. And it's generally in some of the older parts of Antioch. And so, but the majority of people who live in Antioch, which is south of the highway, um, live in very quiet suburban communities. The housing market is fine. People continue to move here, and it's a desirable place. But some of the chatter that you hear, I think, is just very hysterical sometimes. I could take you to, Slant Ranch Shopping Plaza, a pretty great place. I can take you to a host of places. I can take you to the Delta, and you can have a great dinner over at Smith's Landing or at Monica's. Yeah, I have several friends who own boats. You want to go out boating? We'll take you boating. By the way,
Excellent.
Antioch is the only place in the Bay Area where residents have an astronomical amount of access to public land. Don't forget, we have two, two, no, no, three now, three regional parks, and Antioch has a vast park system that's connected to trails. So if folks want to come to Antioch, more than happy to take you to all those great places that we have to offer.
I I want to say, is it Black Diamond Regional Park?
Black Diamond Mines, we have
Yeah.
Concha Loma, and then we're now gonna, the old Roddy Ranch is now going to be a state park. So, we have a lot to be proud of here in the city of Antioch, and people come here to ride their bikes on our trails. People don't know
That's
that. People come here to ride our trails on their bikes. So, there's a lot going on in Antioch. We're not Walnut Creek. If you want, to have like a fancy, glamorous night out, go to Walnut Creek. If you enjoy the outdoors, if you enjoy biking, if you enjoy boating, if you enjoy hiking, we have all that for you here and some great restaurants.
that's a that's a great passion for your city and telling people really what's there. And I think most people probably don't even know that. And I've been fortunate, I've been to both those parks and done hiking around, and one has a beautiful pool and there's a ton of open space in and around the parks. And you guys even have some trails that run through some of the neighborhoods as well that I've gotten to walk through. So really there is some beautiful areas of the city up there, and I've enjoyed visiting them and learning about some of the different neighborhoods. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for being here today, and I appreciate all your time and telling us a little bit more about what's happening out there in East County.
Indeed.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.